Hi, I'm Melanie Barkley with Penn State Extension, and I would like to share some progress that one flock has made by using rams with estimated breeding values. This project was made possible through Northeast Sustainable Agricultural Research and Extension grant funds, which were used for research and education. Northeast SARE serves states in the northeastern area from West Virginia to Maine. In regard to producer progress, we are going to take a look at the flock background and EBV information on the rams selected to breed this flock's ewes in order to improve flock performance. We will also look at the raw data collected on the lambs and then look at how EBVs for this flock changed over time. Lastly, we will look at how EBVs for certain traits improved over time for one particular ram produced by this flock. This flock has always raised purebred Dorsets. However, the flock originally focused on show traits before moving in the direction of performance. In addition to performance-based rams, this flock has also used weather-type show rams to maintain visual eye appeal. The flock has access to 85 acres of pasture in a rotational grazing system. So the decision to move toward performance-type sheep was made because the sheep in the show flock required a high amount of grain in their diet and produced large single lambs that exhibited light muscling. We analyzed the flock further. We find that strengths would be those 85 acres of pasture and good facilities in terms of fencing, watering systems, barns, and feeding systems, and the farm's location, which has good access to ethnic markets. In particular, milk-fed lambs are marketed through the New Holland sale barn. For weaknesses, the flock had too many hard-doing sheep that required grain in order to maintain body condition. Many of the lambs were born as singles to mothers that either lacked adequate mothering ability or were poor milk producers. The lambs also did not have enough muscle. The daughters of these producers would exhibit carcass lambs at the county fair that got disqualified several times because they didn't meet the minimum loin eye size of 2.0 square inches. And overall, the producer was losing money. So when the farm made the decision to move to performance-type sheep, the producers set some goals for the farm. They wanted to increase muscling in the lambs and wanted the ewes to be able to better utilize pasture resources. In other words, grain consumption needed to decrease. Producers also wanted to increase the lambing percentage and increase the weaning weights. Because they sold lambs for the ethnic market, they wanted the lambs to be fat little butterballs that would meet buyer needs. In other words, the lambs had to have some fat covering and be heavily muscled. In general, the flock needed to be easier keeping and the ewes needed to be more self-sufficient, especially at lambing time. When they made the switch to performance-type sheep, the first selection criteria became performance appraisal. So the rams would be selected for EBVs for several traits, and then lambs would be weighed at birth, weaning, and then post-weaning if they were kept for breeding stock. Keep in mind that ideally all lambs would be weighed through post-weaning, but with selling to the ethnic market, this isn't possible. Therefore, the farm also looked at 60-day adjusted weaning weights so that they could make preliminary decisions regarding what lambs to keep for breeding stock. Once the lambs met the minimum standards for performance appraisal, then those lambs were evaluated visually. They needed to have good structure, show good muscling characteristics, have adequate body capacity, and some eye appeal. The youngest daughter showed the lamb in this photo. It has performance type genetics, and it was shown at the Pennsylvania Farm Show, which is Pennsylvania's state fair. In order to make these decisions, the farm started with individual farm records that they're recorded on a barn sheet. Records are taken for every lamb that's born and include the birth weight, birth date, birth type, sex, sire and dam, and any comments about the birth or the ability of the ewe to raise her lambs. Note the circle around one ewe's identification number in the photo, and this is not a good thing for her. It means she has already been marked to be sold at the sale barn. The producers joke that these sheep get to see the Christmas lights or the Easter lights at New Holland. Individual farm records also include weaning weight with a date weighed for all lambs and for those that are kept past weaning. The producers record post-weaning weight and date weighed, plus scan data if the lambs were scanned this year. Now let's go back to the farm goals. 2007 is the year that the farm switched to performance type rams. And the goals for the farm that they chose were to focus on, the goals the farm chose to focus on were improved flock performance through increasing the lambing percentage, increasing weaning weights, and increasing muscle. I'll also point out that often rams with good growth EBVs do not usually also have good eye muscle depth EBVs. So the producers wanted to balance these traits when selecting their rams. The second goal was to decrease feed and healthcare costs by feeding less grain and focusing more heavily on pasture. Plus, the farm wanted to deworm less often. They originally dewormed the flock on about roughly 6 to 8 week rotation, but now they only deworm individuals that require deworming. And ultimately, the farm wanted to become profitable. We take a closer look at how the farm used EBV data to select rams. We need to pull up some individual data on all these rams. This table shows 7 rams that have been used with the flock. The last 2 rams on the list were used in 2007, and then the first 5 were used in 2011 and later. The first column shows the ram ID, and then the second column, BWT, is the birth weight. And you can see that the rams were pretty much average to slightly above average for birth weight. The next 2 columns, WWT is the weaning weight, and PWT is the post-weaning weight. And you can see these rams had the genetic ability to produce lambs with fast growth. PFAT stands for post-weaning fat depth, and all but 1 ram could be expected to produce lean lambs. That first ram in the list, ram 988, with a PFAT value of 0.3, could be expected to produce easier fleshing lambs that the producer chose for pasture utilization. PEMD is a post-weaning eye muscle depth and is a method to evaluate loin eye size. All the rams were positive for the muscling characteristics. The next column, PWEC, looked at the post-weaning egg count. The negative numbers correlate to better resistance to internal parasites. And then the final columns have data for lambing ease direct, carcass value, and trade value. Any of those numbers that you see in the table that appear in red mean that these rams were trait leaders for these particular traits at the time the farm selected the rams. So now the farm's making progress toward their goals. And now we'll take a look at the raw data collected on the farm and how it changed over time. If we start with lambing prolificacy, we'll define this as the number of lambs produced per ewe lambing, and this saw some ups and downs over the time. In 2008, the flock's lambing prolificacy was at 160%, and then it dropped back a little in 2009 before it began to improve through 2014. Now, you remember when I mentioned at the start of the presentation that the producer would occasionally use weather-type bucks to maintain eye appeal? We can see the effects of that when those rams were used in 2015 and when their daughters entered the flock. So our lambing prolificacy dropped back to 153% in 2015 and then began to increase again as the farm went back to using performance-type rams. 2 points that I might make to clarify this situation are that in 2015, 23% of the ewes who lambed were yearlings. And then in 2016, the ewe lambs were not bred as they hadn't reached an acceptable 65 to 70% of their mature weight by the start of the breeding season. So those lambs were held off and bred as yearlings. Death loss changed over the years. And for the most part, the death loss now ranges between 2 and 5%, with the exception of 2019. But you can see that they started out in that 10 to 13% range and have certainly improved. Birth weights, they pretty much moderated at 11 to 12 pounds. And unfortunately, the farm didn't collect birth weight data until 2013. But the producers know that they had lots of large lambs prior to starting weighing. 60-day adjusted weights, again, they saw changes. And as we can expect with the performance rams selected for increased weaning weights, those weaning weights did increase. But when the producer used non-performance type rams, we see the weaning weights begin to drop. And this could be attributed to two things, both the growth potential from the sire, as well as the milking ability of that sire's daughters. Now, the real key in making progress is to take a look at how the EBV data has changed over time, so that we're looking specifically at genetic trends. This is a birth weight table generated by Lamb Plan. And as you can see, the birth weight EBVs for the farm, which is exhibited by the gray line, changed a little over time. So if you think back to the RAM data, we could expect this, as most were pretty much average to slightly above average for their birth weight EBVs. Weaning weight EBVs showed some major changes. So for the years 2000 to 2009, the weaning weights were below average. And then as the producer continued to use performance rams, the weaning weight EBVs increased. You can see these EBVs decreased somewhat when he started using the non-performance type rams. Then we see the same thing with the post-weaning weights compared with the weaning weight EBVs. So our performance type ram EBVs improved lamb post-weaning weights. And then once the non-performance type rams were used, we see a decrease in that post-weaning weight. And post-weaning fat, just like the other data EBVs, these post-weaning fat depths followed pretty much the same trends. So the rams were expected to produce leaner lambs, and we saw that change. And then with the non-performance rams, we see an increase in fat. And then again, we can also expect that our performance type rams increased eye muscle depth, while our non-performance type rams decreased eye muscle depth EBVs. Lamb Plan also generates a summary of traits for the lambs produced on the farm. So this table puts into numerical form the changes that we saw previously on the graphs. I thought it would be interesting to take a look at one ram that was sold to another producer and follow changes in his EBVs over time. So this graph shows how the eye muscle depth in this ram improved over time as the figures became more accurate. So he started out with a negative EBV for eye muscle depth, and then that dropped further into the negative before it began to climb into the positive range. So this ram, 15125, also showed improvement over time with weaning weight. So he's moving from just above 1.0 to close to 4.5. And again, this ram's post-weaning weight EBVs increased as the accuracy on his data increased. He moved from a +3 to about a +10. And I might also point out that this ram is a bit unusual because he exhibits both good muscle and growth data. So the rams excel in one or the other. If we consider some reflections on this producer's progress in improving performance and profitability, we should note that the producers started out by analyzing their ewe flock for strengths and weaknesses. And this allowed them to choose rams based on desired EBVs for several traits. And I think it's also important to note that you need to be patient, as the true EBV values take some time to realize as the accuracy increases.